was raised by a loving family. They projected their love to push me and lead me in the right direction, even though I decided to take an alternative route. My sister, she was devoted from such a young age.
We both were raised Catholic by our parents, and we went to a Catholic school for most of our lives. Growing up, we became a little distant only because Sean and I were 8 years apart. I went off and got married, and he stayed at home. Growing up through his teenage years, he started to have some difficulties and struggles with depression. And as he got older into his teenage years, it got worse and worse.
Around the age of 12 or 13, I realized that my mind was different than everybody else's. I would get severely depressed, and I would cut my thighs with razor blades and heat up screwdrivers to burn certain parts of my body where I could cover up with clothing so nobody could see afterwards. By the age of about 16 is when I really think I became pretty much an atheist and gave up on God's existence.
Once he got married, he had this beautiful daughter, and things seemed like they were okay for a little while, but then things got worse. And Sean got into the wrong crowd. He started to drink. He was trying to deal with his depression, and Satan just really got a really good grip on him. And from there, things got even worse.
At the age of 26, I had already been married, separated, going through a divorce, and a father to the most beautiful daughter a man could ask for. I had also chosen to hustle pool for a living. And at this point in my life, my mind was the most out of control it's ever been. I had a big game coming up, and I was extremely nervous, and somebody offered me a Vicodin to calm my nerves. I was eventually hustling pool, and then was actually selling prescription narcotics to support my addiction, to numb out my emotions and my mind so I didn't have to deal with it. I finally got to the point where I decided to sober up and try to figure out what was going on in my mind and get help. So I went to my first psychiatrist, and they put me on my first minor mood stabilizer, and it actually triggered me to go into a severe manic episode. So I was admitted to psych for the first time. I was put on more powerful antipsychotics and mood stabilizers and released. And it got to the point in my life where pain, suffering, and life itself was meaningless. One night when I went home, I took 18,000 milligrams of Seroquel and 60 milligrams of Xanax, only to be found the next day on the floor by my 2-year-old daughter and my mother. After I became conscious in ICU, I remember praying for the first time in over a decade, and I was asking, if God, if you exist, why didn't you take me? All the doctors told me there was no medical reason whatsoever. I wasn't brain dead or completely just dead. There was no reason whatsoever.
He was constantly in and out of the hospital, tried to kill himself multiple times. Satan just had such a grip on him. I didn't know, my mom didn't know if we were going to get a phone call telling us that he was gone. I mean, he constantly kept trying to hurt himself. It just seemed like at that point we knew that he was either going to die or he needed a miracle.
My childhood friend from about the age of 5 years old was working at his family's tire shop when 2 guys ran in and murdered him over $40. And for some reason, his death hit me really hard. I decided again once at that point that I was going to drink myself to death. So I went on a binge drinking for 13 to 14 days without eating.
So my faith was really tested at that time. I felt like giving up. Like, what was the point of praying anymore? Because God just wasn't hearing it. One day I was at work and I walked into one of my patients' rooms to give her some medications, and there was a lady sitting next to her who I think was a family member. She was a visitor, and she seemed a little strange. She seemed a little off. I'm not sure if she was mentally ill or what was going on with her, but I just remember her being different. And as I started to leave, this lady looked me right in the eye and she said, "I know you've been praying for him. God hears you in his timing." And I was shocked. I didn't know what to think. I looked at her family members to see what they thought, but they didn't say anything. It was almost like they didn't even hear anything she said to me. So I was a little freaked out about the whole thing. And I left, and I started to pray for Sean again.
Finally, I ended up at my best friend's house. After a couple days and she realized what I was doing, she told me to snap out of it. I went back to my mom's and I told her that I needed to get help. They again once admitted me to psych, but this time in psych, everything was different. There was a young 18-year-old girl who was schizophrenic and she couldn't even tell you her name, but I remember her walking down the halls with a copy of the New Testament Bible, humming and singing the verses and songs she had made up. And that just grabbed my attention like no other.
I had attended service on a Sunday, 9 o'clock service, and in the service, Pastor Jeremy was speaking of addiction, and he talked about suicide and depression and everything that Sean had really been struggling with. And I knew that God was speaking to me and that he needed to speak to Sean.
One morning I woke up at about 6:30 in the morning to check out Metro. Did not believe in God whatsoever, denied his existence all the time. Just wanted to see what it was all about. And when I showed up, Pastor Jay was literally preaching right to me. I'm not gonna lie, I had chills after that. So after service, I walked back to Metro Kids where my sister was serving just to say hi. And when she saw me, she was in tears. And she told me she had prayed for somehow God to get me to this service.
At that time, I didn't know it, but I talked to my husband. I went to go thank him for bringing Sean, and he said to me, "I didn't bring Sean." I said, "What do you mean? I sent you a text." He said, "I never saw the text. We were running late for service." So Sean made it to that service on his own. I think he actually walked that day because he wasn't even driving. And it was from that moment that I knew that God was really starting to work in his life.
Later on, she talked to me and asked if, I would think about going to Renew. And I thought about it and thinking, I've been through so many psychiatrists and so many therapists. What can these people tell me that I haven't already heard? But I decided, let's check it out.
So I spoke with Sean, and he was willing, and him and I went to Renew that Tuesday. And it was just there that they just kind of welcomed him with loving arms.
I realized that even Christians have people with addiction problems and mental problems. And I decided to share part of my story. Unlike any psychiatrist or any doctor, they thanked me and they told me they loved me. And it was honestly the most fulfilling time I've ever shared any part of my life. After the group, as I was walking out, I prayed again. I said, if you're real and you exist, I need some kind of sign. And I'll never forget it. On the ride home, we saw the lowest shooting star I have ever seen in my entire life. When I got home, I researched shooting stars, and I came across a couple articles that said they are known as teardrops from an angel or God himself. And I knew right there that he did exist this entire time. The more I pushed him away and the more I denied him, the harder he fought to pull me to him, and he loved me even more. I believe that I was saved that night on the ride home. It wasn't that he was never talking to me, I just wasn't listening. My name's Sean Smith, and I am Metro.